is Lisa, your host of Unexplained Arkansas, the podcast. Quick business, of course, the live show. So when this episode comes out, I'm trying to think of how many days, just like a week or two, yeah. So a couple weeks until the live show. So much fun planned. So we're going to cover the history and the haunts, and then of course a little look at the infamous trials of the White County Courthouse, and there is so much there. The White County Courthouse is one of the oldest, or is the oldest, still in use courthouse in the state, from what I understand. So it's just awesome, and it's right across from the Alto where we're going to be doing the show. So anyway, just show up. It is February 8th. If you're coming from out of town, I would definitely message me just to reserve your spot, and then you can pay by cash or card at the door. So just FYI on that. And yeah, so we're really excited. So live show February 8th. That is a Saturday night in Searcy at the Rialto. So today's episode is 73, and it is John Wayne Gacy's connection to Arkansas. And John Wayne Gacy has always been fascinating, I know, to so many people. What he did is horrific, and when I think about all the devastation and all the families that he, hurt, it's awful. So in this episode, we're going to kind of look at, how I do, kind of from the beginning. So this is part one, so there's just too much information. So this is part one. There will be part two. So John Wayne Gacy brutally murdered, at minimum, what we're aware of, 33 young men between the time frame of around 1972 to 1978. So these events were done in a suburb of Chicago, and it quickly alarmed the whole nation. But the signs were there. And during the time frame of these brutal murders, Gacy would travel to Arkansas. So, now as you know, like I said, what I do, I would like to start at the beginning. So, Gacy was born March 17th of 1942 to John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robison Gacy. Gacy had an older sister named Joanne that was 2 years older than him, and then he would have a younger younger sister, Karen, and she was born when he was 3. Gacy's family lived in the Avondale community of Chicago, so he lived in Chicago, but the area is Avondale. It is a kind of, I would say, the neighborhood. It is in the northwest section of the city, and kind of per the internet, it was a very, very nice place to live. Like, it was very nice. Gacy's father was a machinist with a company called Steam Valve Manufacturing, and his mom was a stay-at-home mom. His father was of Polish descent, like his family was from Poland, and his mom's family was Danish. They were Catholic, and his father was said by Gacy himself to be very conservative. His father was also said by the family and Gacy to be a heavy alcoholic and extremely abusive at times to the family. In an interview, his sister Karen stated their father really saved his anger for little John, and that their mother, Marion, would always protect and console John, and we're talking Gacy, John Wayne, after his father would beat him or belittle him. So there was some physical abuse and then verbal abuse for sure. And Gacy was actually really a very sickly child. He was born with a chronic heart condition. They didn't really quite give it a name. I don't think they really understood the cause or whatever, but he did have seizures and blackouts in his youth and teens. And this condition would keep little John at home sick and not able to do sports, like the other boys his age. So he would be kind of, seen by his father to be weak, or, I guess he was a little pudgy, because of the inactivity. And so this would be a source of ridicule by his father when his father was drinking. And Gacy would later say that his father even felt like Gacy was faking his illnesses. So, in fact, by the time Gacy entered his teens, he spent so much time kind of in and out of the hospital that he did not graduate high school. Like, he just missed too much class, and so he did not graduate. Gacy would also state in his youth that he was molested by a girl growing up, and then also by a family friend of a friend of the family who was a contractor. And he stated this was between the ages of when he was 10 and 12. I mean, if that is true, which I would think that I don't see why he would lie about that at all. That would greatly, I would think, be a factor on a lot of what he did. Not to say that that was, anyway, reasoning itself to kill people, but just his mentality, I guess. He did also get in trouble himself, he said, by his father for being caught, like with a friend, being inappropriate with a little girl. And this was when he was young. So it's kind of like evidently he faced these, molestations and then perpetrated it himself at a young age. And I don't, I'm not a psychologist or whatever, but you do hear of that happening when people are taught such or whatever. They've even gotten into that deeply with like the Menendez brothers and such. So Gacy stated he never told his father about his own, molestation. Like he was just afraid his father would somehow blame it on him, so he did not mention it. He did not bring it up. And that in itself is just extremely disturbing and sad, but it happens and obviously could be an indicator, although that doesn't mean that people that are molested go on to be serial killers by any means or stretch of the imagination. So, again, that nature versus nurture both being true, but he definitely, obviously faced a difficult childhood, bottom line. So, as for Gacy's demeanor, though, his sister Karen, in an interview, remembered him to be very affectionate, loving, very family oriented. I think this is very interesting. Like and later on, you'll see people describe him, but just very, very normal, quote unquote, just very, just a good brother, like just a good brother. And you could tell that there was an affection there. And she did also, say that he was very protected, again, by his mother, which would kind of be a lifelong thing for Gacy. And I'm sure Marion felt very much like she needed to protect her little boy. It was her only son. And I think that by all accounts, she was a very loving, generous mother. And especially, with his heart condition and being sick, right off the bat, she was just very protective. Unfortunately, her protection and such, or coddling, or whatever you want to call it, did not help him out much long run. But I can definitely, I guess myself, as a mom, understand Marion's position. She's obviously married to a man with, a sickness, and then he's, mean to her little baby boy, and who is a sickly child. So I definitely understand that. By the age of 18, Gacy became involved in politics, and he even joined the Democratic Party. He was an assistant precinct captain, who was an officer, and that's basically someone that kind of took on this area and would be like a recruiter for the party, kind of connecting directly with voters for the party. So kind of a recruiter. And this would be literally resounding thing like his entire life. His connection to community, the Democratic Party, and just civic groups in general, I will say. So this also really didn't make his dad happy because his dad was Republican and very conservative. And evidently, he would demean Gacy for this and call him a patsy. I don't really, yeah, I don't know what that means. I guess he's saying I don't know. I didn't look that up. I'm gonna have to look that up. So by the time Gacy was 20, and this was 1962, so Gacy had had enough of his father. He had had enough of living at home. There had been just some more stuff, like his father had, helped him purchase a car, but then would kind of, basically take the keys away from Gacy if Gacy didn't do certain things that made his father happy. So Gacy was just done with being under his dad's thumb, I guess. So with very little money and no connections or anything, he took off for Las Vegas, actually. And there he did seek and got a job with an ambulance service. I think from what I understand, he didn't graduate high school, so he did fudge, his paperwork and, qualifications, of course. And the ambulance service evidently did transfer him to work at the Palm Mortuary, which I did look this up. They are still active today. It appears to be kind of like a franchise deal with numerous locations under them. But at the mortuary, basically he was just an assistant. He was doing everything. He was sitting in on embalmings. He was doing whatever they needed, I guess, picking up, driving, kind of doing gopher work. He would even be a pallbearer, whatever was needed in this mortuary. And he stated himself that he literally told a story that he would sleep on a small cot in the mortuary, and one time whatever reason, obviously not, he didn't even understand, he crawled into a coffin with a teenage boy before it shocked him that he did that, and he said he left Las Vegas after that time period and headed back to Chicago. So whatever was going on with his own mind psychologically, it freaked him out basically, and so he just went back to Chicago. So back in Chicago, he did a business course, it said, at the Northwestern Business College, and did complete that course in 1964, and then went on to work as a management trainee in a company called Nunn Bush Shoe Company. And this company, it's interesting, is also still in business and has locations, especially around the northern part of the country. It looks like you can order their shoes online. So it looks like men's kind of dress shoes is what they specialize in. I don't know. It looked interesting, but it's a very old company. So the company evidently did transfer him to Springfield, Illinois, which is around 200 or so miles away from his family in Chicago. And there he worked in a store as a salesman. He's management and training basically, but he's, got to put in his time. So he does meet a young lady named Marlon Myers. And Marlon was born in Illinois like Gacy, and she was born in 1945. And her father was very successful, and he would eventually, own some KFC restaurants, and we'll get into that. So while Gacy was in Springfield, he did become active and kind of rose in the ranks of the local JC club there. And basically the JC's was a civic, or because I've always wondered about this, because I've heard of this, but basically a civic organization, the long name known as the United States Junior Chamber. And it was a non-profit club, just civic group, that goes back to the 1920s. And basically he was just, getting involved. And it's kind of said that he really enjoyed getting involved with civic groups. He did a lot of quote-unquote good for the civic groups, but I think he also enjoyed the connections and boastings. So he was a very egocentric man, we'll say that. So in September of 1964, Gacy did marry Marlon, And then they moved to Waterloo, Iowa. And so this was where Marlon's dad had purchased he had like 3 KFC restaurants, and he wanted Gacy to work in his restaurants and learn the business. And I'm sure he wanted to set up Marlon, and I mean, this is more probably about Marlon than Gacy, but this was an extremely good deal for Gacy. I mean, he paid him, like right off the bat, he paid him like $15,000 a year, which was the equivalency of making $150,000. So just thinking that in today's money. So right away he's setting him up, and he had profit sharing. So he's making a good salary, he can buy a nice house, he basically can take care of Marlon. And little side note, I thought that was very interesting, but Marlon's father was born in Rogers, Arkansas in 1921. So Marlon's family had a connection to Arkansas and family. With the move to Iowa, so Gacy does keep involvement and gets involvement in the JC group there in Iowa. And he did become a recruiter for the organization, and evidently he took the membership numbers from being like only 150 members to like 400. I mean, so he tripled the numbers. However, the way he did this was he would throw absolutely wild parties that included just basically filling everybody with alcohol and showing them stag films like pornography. And basically, because of his recruiting numbers, and of course this is how he's getting these guys to join, but he did rise in the JCs, and he would even become a vice president, and would serve on the board of directors for the JCs in that area, that group. So, and of course the JCs, they are a civic group. They do a lot of fundraising for different things. They do a lot of charity work, and he did that too. He was very, very a big part of it. Like, he did a lot, and evidently he was a worker. I will say that amongst other things, he was a worker. So he's doing a lot of things. He's doing a lot of good, but also the JCs are getting known for their involvement in drug abuse, prostitution, pornography, and wife swapping. Yeah. So just basically the whole scene was wild. Yes. So Karen, Gacy's younger sister, did recall an incident when she and her husband came to visit him and Marlon during this time, and Gacy took them to a JC event. It was just an evening event, like a charity ball or whatever, something, very nice sounding. And then afterwards, he told his sister he wouldn't be coming home with them. In fact, he went home with another JC's wife, and then that JC came home with Marlon. And this is all right in front of his sister. So the next morning, the man left the house, and Gacy came home, and Karen told her brother off, and she was pissed. She said, she wasn't a prudish woman, but she thought that was absolutely inappropriate and didn't appreciate him, putting her and her husband in that awkward situation of literally being, just right in front of their face, them swapping partners. So she packed up and they left. She was like, I'm out of here, and don't you ever do that in front of me ever again, just kind of let him have it. And she did say, and I don't blame her one bit, that is just, I am a prudish person, so I'll just be like, I'm a prude, and I don't appreciate that, and yeah, that's just awkward, but no thank you. I mean, she was kind of like, well, that's fine what you do in your own time, but please don't do it in front of me, type thing. So anyway, I will say, she said about Gacy was that she felt that whatever he wanted to do, just always growing up, like, and again, she loved her brother. He was very good to her, and his demeanor was always really good. Like, he had a very good personality. He was not awkward and weird like you think that a serial killer would be. Like, he was very outgoing. He was very, quote unquote, normal. But she said that anything that he felt was okay, he would do, like basically with this, just getting people involved in just this drugs and pornography and the stag films and all these things. Like she did not see that as weird, like not weird, but like she could definitely see him doing that because that was kind of his thing as far as like if he felt something was fine, he would just push it on everybody else and just make it happen, so to speak. So she was definitely not surprised, I should say. During these years, Marlon did give birth to 2 children. So Gacy had 2 children. He had a son in February 1966, and then he did have a daughter in 1967. And I guess with all this wife swapping, I mean, were they his? I don't know. Anywho, I don't know what they look like. And I really don't, not to say I would give their names or anything, but they are not listed anywhere. So, anywho, you'll see that. But Gacy would reflect on these years as his best years. Like this was just a good time period for him. Obviously, he was making good money. He was having fun. And of course, he had a wife and children. And so I really think he enjoyed having these things, but he definitely had all these other proclivities that were not wholesome, that were not family oriented, and he could never hold on to this good life, so to speak. And Gacy, although he did not have such a great relationship with his father, however, he did always seek his father's approval. It was very important to him, as it is to most children. I mean, no matter how awful your parents are, you want to seek their approval, and that's been said over and over again, like no matter how awful of a childhood they have. So he definitely sought his dad's approval, and he did state during this time that his dad would come to visit and tell him how well he had done and how proud he was of him. So these were really good moments in Gacy's life, having his father be proud of him. And he said his father even apologized to him and told him how good he had done. So Gacy's in a good mode right this second. However, also during this time, Gacy would reflect later that he did have some homosexual encounters. And so he said that there were a couple of young men, and he would always kind of state with Gacy that either these men, it was prompted by them or consensual or just not. He never wanted to be called homosexual, although he said he did not have any issues with homosexuals, but he never wanted to be called homosexual. He wanted to be called bisexual. He said that he was bisexual and that he really actually loved women first and foremost. Now, he did state that there was one moment that he was offered, I guess, he had a young man over, they were drinking and doing the drugs and watching pornography, and, actually what would happen is Gacy would take advantage, but Gacy would turn it to say that they were taking advantage of him instead of the other way around. So it really depended on who he was talking to. But another thing is he was always lying. But he did state even while courting Marlon, he did have a homosexual encounter with a colleague in the JC. So this would have been in Springfield, Illinois. But it was never him who wound up, again, he never said that he initiated anything. He said that the man initiated everything with him. And he would keep on, this whole thing with Gacy would continue his whole life as far as pushing blame on everybody else for, his misdeeds, even murder, pushing the blame. So in December 3rd of 1968, Gacy's bad actions were catching up with him, and he was caught. So he did plead guilty on one count of sodomy charges, and this was kind of a year before he pled guilty. He had sexually assaulted a 15-year-old boy. Last name is Voorhees. The boy's father was a local state representative and part of the JCs. And evidently Gacy had lured the boy, and we're talking a 15-year-old boy. He lured the boy to his home with the promise of alcohol and pornography, just like the boy knew what kind of went on with the JC's events and such. And so he did show the boy a stag film and then made the boy perform sexual acts on him. The boy eventually told his dad, and good for him. And his dad 100% believed him. So there were evidently other things going on. So there were other youths that this was happening to, but they weren't coming forward. Okay, the charges weren't sticking on these other situations. So, in Gacy, even though he pleaded guilty, he would always state that the charges were blackmail and retaliation because evidently, according to him, the boy's father wanted to keep Gacy from being elected president of the JCs. And Gacy would even tell his family and everyone else that the sex acts were consensual. Well, I'm sorry. For one thing, they can't be consensual when a boy is 15. I don't know what the laws were then, but absolutely not consensual. And he was stating that the boy just wanted to blackmail him. So, yeah, so he is pushing the blame, although he does, state that he's guilty. So Gacy was also found in trouble on some other grounds. So during this time that he was in trouble for the charges of the sodomy, he then decided to pay an 18-year-old dude that worked for him. His name was Russell Schroeder, and he worked for him at one of the KFCs. So he told Schroeder to find, and he would pay him money, but to go find 15-year-old Voorhees and beat him up and scare him so that he would drop the charges. Like, basically, he wanted to Voorhees into not testifying against him. However, it all backfired because Schroeder did evidently go to beat up Voorhees and evidently sprayed him with mace and all this other stuff. Well, Voorhees just went to the police and then got Schroeder in trouble. Then Schroeder, of course, turns on Gacy and tells the police that he was paid $300 to do it and that Gacy put him up to it. So it all kind of backfired. And I believe that kind of situated Gacy into just pleading guilty finally. Also during this time, so the court did, because of the charges, I think any sexual deviant situation, the courts typically, or it appears that they would just automatically send, the assailant for psychoanalyzation. So he was sent to the psychiatric hospital at the University of Iowa, and they did find him competent to stand trial. However, they also stated in their evaluation that he had an antisocial disorder, and he was a sexual deviant, and he would never be cured. Like, I'm not sure why this was all buried and forgotten, but yeah, so these were the signs. These are big, big red flags of his future. So this brought his good time, of course, to an end. Marlon files for divorce. She wants nothing to do with him. She wanted possession of the home, the children, everything. She wanted to cut ties completely with Gacy, and of course Marlon's family wanted the same thing. Gacy's family, of course, is extremely distraught. They are extremely close, and they come to actually visit. I guess the time frame when he's on trial and then getting sentenced, of course his family's there, and Marlon's father meets with them and tells them, after this came out about Voorhees, that a lot of other boys that Gacy had been managing at the KFCs had come forward with all kinds of similar stories. So this was not a one-off as far as, the sex acts on Voorhees and assault, sexual assault of him. This had been happening quite a bit. So no one was coming forward. They were scared. This was their boss. He was manipulating them. He was, I'm sure he was blackmailing them as well. So, and telling them that no one would believe them, blah, blah. Who knows what he was telling them. So it's definitely a great thing that he was out of that situation because he had been taking full advantage of it. So, and Gacy's family at that time, they're believing him. In fact, some of the JCs were even believing him as far as thinking that he had been, railroaded and blah blah. And again, Gacy's just he is very good at covering his tracks. He is very personable. He has a lot of connections. So some people are actually still believing Gacy, and even Gacy's family believes that it was consensual and that he was just getting railroaded. So I'm sure long run and looking back, they had their doubts in the back of their head, but they were giving Gacy the just kind of a little bit of credit for thinking that he was not necessarily in complete wrong. Although, again, and especially by today's standards, he's completely in the wrong no matter what. So Gacy is sentenced to 10 years in prison. They do send him to a male reformatory at the Anamosa State Penitentiary. I can't say that word. In Anamosa, Iowa. And this is about 68 miles southeast of Waterloo. So he is in Iowa. He is in prison. He's in a male reformatory. So immediately upon his arrival, Gacy really became, typical Gacy. He was a model prisoner. He was charming. He kind of rose in the ranks of even the prison. He just kind of, it's almost like he treated it like everything else in his life, like just kind of like just like a stepping stone. So, above all else, he is extremely bright. He's extremely bright, extremely manipulative, of course, and a liar. So he did tell the other inmates he was in prison regarding trouble with pornography, that he had gotten in trouble for underage pornography. That's what he's telling. So they would never know the true reason, because if they really had known what he did, like, he would have been, it would have been really bad for him, of course, with, so, and as assaulting a child sexually, of course. So while there, he did become the head chef in the prison kitchen, and evidently this was a huge deal. He had like 8 or 9 other chefs working under him, so he was the head chef. He joined the prison JC chapter and took the membership from 50 to 650. It literally won him an award with the JCs. While in prison, he's winning awards, guys. He also did a lot of charitable work with the JCs. He did a lot of good work for the prison itself. He even manipulated into this. Evidently, there was like this miniature golf park that was kind of closed or something. So he got with them and said that they could, if they donated to the prison, and he didn't really say exactly what it was for, or that it was a prison. He just said to a nonprofit, it's going to be, like a write-off for you. So so he basically got this whole miniature golf park donated to the prison for the guys that lived there, in the prison, so that they could play miniature golf all the time. It was like he did a lot of quote unquote good things. He's just such a, I don't know, it's amazing how horrible he was, but how many good things he did. Now, I will say, did he do the good things for his own self-importance? Yes. Yes, 100%. So he was evidently first up for parole in June of 1969. And he is sent to prison in 1968, given a 10-year sentence, and his first parole hearing is literally in 69. So he was denied parole at that time, and after this happened, he did go ahead and complete 16 high school courses so he could get his high school diploma. And he did complete that by November of 1969. So within 5 months, he did complete that. Less than that. So on Christmas Day of 1969, so by the end of the year, it said that Gacy's father did pass away from cirrhosis. And Gacy would take this incredibly hard. Gacy would blame himself. I mean, he literally sobbed. He had made friends with some, people in the prison, and they would later interview. It was kind of the only time they ever saw him cry. Like, he literally just was devastated, and he felt a lot of guilt around his father's death. He felt like, and he would tell his family that, his dad died because of him, what he had done to the family and being in prison and such. So, and Gacy was very devastated because the prison wouldn't let him go to the funeral. So he didn't get to go to the funeral. And this was just devastating. So the family would reflect that he was genuinely overcome and heartbroken by the death of his father. And he would reflect on that in later years, that yes, that was devastating. So literally by June of 1970, Gacy gets paroled. Yes. Yeah. He's literally given a 12-month probation, in which kind of, on probation you have certain rules or whatever that really no one's evidently at this time even watching. But you're supposed to have like a nightly curfew, you have to have a job, and the conditions were he had to live with his mother so that he could be supervised is the thought. So that was the way that this was going to happen. And so it was arranged between Iowa, the state of Iowa, and Illinois to grant him this transfer because, his mom still lived in Chicago. So obviously he was going to have to do his parole in Chicago. So he literally only served 18 months of a 10-year sentence. And the state of Iowa releases him, states he's fine now, he's rehabbed. I mean, completely dismissing the fact that the psychiatrist that saw him literally said he was a sexual psychopath and that there was no treatment that could cure him and that he would continue to commit crimes his entire life. Like, that was completely ignored, completely. And honestly, if he had actually been in jail from 68 to 78, I mean, so much would have been avoided if he had actually been kept, but that's not what happened. So he is out. It is June of 1970, and he is out. So he goes and lives with Marion in Chicago. He goes to work. His sister Karen remembers that he goes to work at a restaurant called Bruno's, and it was like a pizza place in Chicago, but they also made all kinds of Italian food. And he did very well there. He again, he's charming, he's Gacy, he is a hard worker. So he also didn't stop being Gacy, though. He was literally arrested and charged for sexually assaulting a teenage boy that he picked up at a Greyhound bus terminal in Chicago. The charges were actually dropped in February of 1971, so this is 71, so not even a year after he's released from prison. He's still in his parole. The boy fails to show up to court, and so the charges are dropped. So likewise, in June of 1971, so a few months later, he is charged for aggravated sexual battery because he had picked up a young man by flashing a police badge, and once the young man was in his car, he forced him to perform sex acts. And then these charges were dropped as well because the boy evidently was found to be trying to blackmail Gacy, I guess pay him money or something. So the Iowa State Parole Board never heard about these issues because the charges were dropped. And thus his parole actually was up, so he was done with parole by October of 1971. And his record was sealed. So, can't even believe this. I mean, I know. Can't even make this stuff up. So, again, he should have still been in prison, theoretically. And now he's been out since 70, and now he's even done with his parole, and he's literally committed to horrendous, acts of violence on these young men. So he is still very much Gacying it, and I'm sure he's feeling like he's invincible, like he can do no wrong. A little sip of coffee. So also during this time, to kind of make more money, so he's working in the restaurant, this was between the 1970 and 1972. But on the side, he stated he started painting. So he started doing some painting on the side and weekends just to kind of make more money. And eventually he did quit working in the restaurant and went like full time into this painting. He said he painted and decorated and did maintenance work for places. And so he did form a business called PDM, which stood for Painting, Decorating, and Maintenance. He also, for business reasons, so he wanted his mom to sell her apartment. So they were living in an apartment in Chicago, so he didn't have a lot of space. And he said he really wanted a garage. So he did talk his mom into purchasing them a house to share. So she purchased 8213 West Summerdale Avenue. And this is Des Plaines, I think I'm saying that right, Illinois. This is like a quiet suburb of Chicago. And it's about 27 miles to the northwest of the city. So they had been living in the city this whole time. But now this area, Des Plaines, is a suburb. So Gacy stated in this home, like he purchased it because it had a garage, he had place for all his equipment, because he was quickly becoming very busy with his business and expanding, and you need a lot of space. So he said that he literally conducted business from the home. He utilized the home, at least at first, as his business office. Like a front room was his office, and of course his mom is living there. So everybody was kind of happy with this move. According to Karen, she said her mom was happy to be in a house. Gacy was happy to have the space, and it was a very nice kind of middle class working, good, suburb area. So he would end up growing the business and being very successful. He said, according to him, he kind of grew it from having like the PDM. He had kind of PDM contractors, he had PDM plumbing, and then he partnered as well eventually with a company called Rafco, and all that they did was specialize in remodeling of pharmacies. Like that was their focus. So remember that. Now, in this time period, he did begin dating a woman named Carol Hoff. And she had actually known and evidently had dated Gacy like in high school, and she was a very good friend to his sister Karen. And Carol was divorced herself, and she had 2 girls. So they began dating. By the 1st of July of 1972, Gacy and Carol get married. He kind of reflects back on it that it was just kind of like a front. I don't know. He was kind of weird about it. They were, best friends and blah blah. She talks about it and looked at it more like a normal marriage, like he was, they loved each other. But anyway, they had a very simple, nice ceremony. She looked very nice. He looked very happy and normal, and he did. He always looked pretty normal. Just kind of a jovial guy. And for the most part, he was very jovial and nice. It wasn't like he was, running around with crazy eyes and, being mean to everybody. It is said that she moved into the Summerdale home along with, and I guess her mother was with her, so of course it would be her and her mom and then the 2 girls. So Marion, not wanting, this would have been a crowded situation and not wanting to kind of infringe on this new marriage. So Marion moves out and gets her own place. She gets an apartment or a condo, for herself. So Carol, in interviews, all she had to say, was Gacy was super good to her girls. She treated them like they were his own. I think that they called him Papa Gacy, and he was very good to them. Carol would recount, that it was a little weird, but there was always young men coming in and out of the home, but it was always, associated with Gacy's work. He employed young men, and he even stated he employed young men because if he employed, they were cheaper. It's cheaper labor, but also he could train them or, have them do things the way that he wanted them done instead of someone that had a lot of experience and had a lot of their own way of doing things. So that was his his thoughts, but she did notate that there were just a lot of young men coming in and out. And eventually, I guess she didn't think a lot of it at first, and then eventually she kind of thought that Gacy was dealing drugs, which, he probably was. Coffee break. So he did have two young men in particular that worked for him, a young man called Michael Rossi and David Cram. And they were constantly around. She didn't like them. She started to notice weird things going on and weird, comings and goings, weird items in the garage and in Gacy's car. And yeah, she was, her, things were starting to click for her. Let's put it this way. So she also recounted a situation that happened, and Karen recounted this. So this is Gacy's sister. Evidently, her mom had told her of a time her mom had been out, running errands one evening, and she came home to her apartment, and she, turned on the lights, and Gacy was there. She found him with a man in her apartment, and it startled her. Like, she was like, this was not normal. Obviously, Gacy had keys to her place, and he could go back and forth. That's normal for a child to have keys to their, I had a key to my mom's house. That's normal, but the fact that he was there with another man, that was not normal. And it very much startled her, and so she had mentioned it to Karen, and then, she had just mentioned that she was going to find out more about it. Well, when Karen asked her about it, and if John had ever given her an explanation about it, all Marion said, "Oh, it was nothing. He just scared me. It's fine. No big deal." So she kind of brushed it off. But Karen, of course, in retrospect, is, thinking, her mom would never say anything bad about John, period. And so she didn't know how much her mother may have known or covered up for John. Not to say that she knew that he was murdering men, but she felt like her mom knew more, and she said her mom literally took it all to the grave. Her mom would end up passing away in 1989. So in this time frame, of course, we're around 1972, 1975, between that. So Gacy is working very hard. He's being very successful, and he is once again very much active with the Democratic Party. So initially, he offers for his employees to clean the party's headquarters at no charge, and then he is rewarded with an invitation to actually serve on the Norwood Park, which is kind of his area, the street lighting committee, subsequently earning a title of precinct captain. So he's a precinct captain now. And of course, the precinct captains are in charge of recruiting, basically. And so he's recruiting for the Democratic Party. And another thing he's involved in is Gacy is appointed director of the Chicago's annual Polish Constitution Day parade. So he's doing, and this is in 1975. And through his work with the parade, Gacy is actually, which he would actually supervise this parade for 3 years, up until 1978, but Gacy, of course, is meeting a lot of people in the Democratic Party, and he has actually got to meet in his photograph with First Lady Rosalind Carter. He's literally in this photograph wearing a pin, and it's like an S, and it indicates that he was a person given special clearance. Later on, when all of his horrific tales are made public, this was a source of embarrassment for the Secret Service, because they're supposed to clear everybody. And clearly I don't know if they just didn't check. And obviously this is an age before computer systems and before everyone can easily look at everyone's background. So obviously they didn't dive deep into clearing people. Like, they didn't dive deep into their past, because they did not know all of his previous, challenges. And I will be posting pictures along with the episode, and I'll post a picture of Gacy with the First Lady. And she was very pretty. I don't know a lot about her, but it was a very nice picture. Additionally, with his work with the civil group, so Gacy would dress up as a clown. And through his membership, he was a member with the local Moose Club, it's just another civic group. He became kind of aware of a club for clowns. It was a club for clowns called the Jolly Joker Club, and they would work and perform at fundraising events and parades, and they would additionally volunteer with entertaining children, like hospitalized children. So more civic work, basically, more, charity work. So in late 1975, Gacy joined the Clown Club and created his own character, Pogo the Clown, and then Patches the Clown. And he came up with his own makeup and costumes, and he designed those. And he stated that he described Pogo as a happy clown, whereas Patches was a more serious clown. Creepy. So, and I did already post, actually, so we did go to the Crime Museum, and so I did post his actual costumes that were in that museum, and I'll be reposting with this episode and such. So, Gacy did state in his own words in a 1992 interview that when he dressed as a clown, he literally became childlike. He would remember his own childhood, and it just helped him to relax. Like, he said that he enjoyed it because it was kind of like his, unwinding, so to speak. And he stated he never was anything evil in the clown suit. Like, he really, after all, everything came out, he felt the media, of course, made him look evil, like he was an evil clown, but he said that he never had any ill intent with his clown, thing. He definitely did not appreciate the whole killer clown persona that the media talked about. He was mad at the media for that, quote unquote. And we'll discuss in part 2 the more of the clown stuff because there is more after the fact. So by 1975, at the same time also, so Gacy was pretty much getting tired of married life. I guess he was just tired of putting on a front, so to speak. So he went on to tell Carol that, and during this time, he told Carol that he was bisexual. And subsequently, by Mother's Day that year, he went on to tell her that that would be the final time that they would, have intercourse. Like, he was done with the whole, marriage stuff with her. And then pretty much he would not come home at night. Like, Carol recounted he would not come home at night. He would be out in the early morning hours. She noticed more and more teenage boys were coming in and out of the house. She had found homosexual pornography in the home, and she was also finding boys' identification information, like their driver's license and wallets of boys left in the house. And she did confront Gacy about it, and he basically just yelled at her that it was none of her business. And so finally, she was fed up with all of this, and it was pretty clear he was done. So she does file for divorce in October of 1975, although she didn't actually move out of the home until February of 1976. And the divorce filings were falsely based on infidelity, like him being unfaithful with women. That was evidently in the divorce filings to kind of cover up him, again, just keep everything that he didn't want said, spoken. So once Carol is out of the home, Gacy would continue to work long hours. He was working long hours. And then he also had his workers, Michael Rossi and David Cram. They would kind of be in and out of the house and living with him. And even according to all of them, he would, it's kind of like, he had a work relationship with them, but he would also have relations with them. And it would be, for their benefit, money, this and that. He would loan them stuff. He would pay for stuff. So it was kind of just like this, I don't know, toxic relationship with these boys, and they're young. They're probably in their early 20s, if even that. So, but yeah, so they're kind of in and out, and the neighbors even notated, like after, they knew that Gacy got a divorce. Obviously, neighbors keep up with stuff. They know what's up. They see that there's people in and out of the house. There's numerous parties going on. Gacy himself is leaving the house in all hours of the night, and that's not normal for a sleepy little suburban neighborhood. This would not be normal. This would be noticed, and this was being noticed by the neighbors, although the neighbors would always contend how nice Gacy was. So just FYI on that. But yeah, so they're noticing lights are on and off all night. They're just noticing that this is just not a normal situation. However, obviously no one knew how seriously wrong and how awful things were actually going on in the house. So on Monday, December 11th of 1978, so we're fast tracking from 76 to 78. So Gacy goes to a pharmacy called Nissan, I think it's Nissan Pharmacy, to meet with the owner of Phil Torf, and he's discussing with him a possible remodeling of the store. And again, this is part of one of the companies that Gacy's with, that this is what they specialize in. So while there, Gacy does interact with a young man named Rob Piest. And Rob, I think it's Piest or Piest. So Rob was a 15-year-old boy working at the Nissan Pharmacy. He was going to high school. And I guess Gacy, this was kind of his MO. He encountered Rob and then told him to contact him about, working for him, that he had work, he could make a lot of money working for Gacy. And Rob was a very nice-looking 15-year-old young man. So that evening when Rob got off work from the pharmacy, so it said that his mom had come to pick him up from the pharmacy like she did, and she arrived, and Rob told her that he needed to talk really quickly to a contractor. He didn't say the name, he just said a contractor that was in the store earlier about a job. So she said that she would wait on him, and I guess she waited and waited, and he didn't live far. This is like a neighborhood pharmacy, so he never showed back up. That was the very last time Rob would be seen. And this was 100% not normal. Like, Rob was a very good kid. He was very close to his family. He was an excellent student. He was popular at school. He liked school. He was never in any trouble. In fact, that same night was his mom's birthday, and they were all, the whole point, she was picking him up and going to take him home because they were celebrating her birthday with a dinner. And the family knew that something was amiss because he would never have missed her birthday dinner, like never. So his parents immediately sprung into action. Were immediately at the police station, immediately calling everybody. They were immediately jumping on this, as any parent would do. I can't even imagine them being, I'm sure that they were just beside themselves. So they immediately go to the Des Plaines Police Department and file a missing persons report on Rob. So the Des Plaines Police Department took this, very seriously. They could tell how serious the family was and how frightened they were. And they were actually listening intently because his mom told the police that what Rob had said, that he had, mentioned he was going to talk to a contractor that had been in the pharmacy that day. And the police are notating this. This clicks, okay? This like, okay, what's this about? So this led the police to talk to the store owner, the Phil Torf, and then Phil Torf leads them to John Wayne Gacy, like the name of the contractor that he had talked to. So the police, and this is pretty immediate, guys. So the police track down Gacy. Right away, the police are feeling like something's not right. Like, they get a gut feeling right away about Gacy because Gacy was super defensive. Like, almost like, why would you even, just the way Gacy came off alarmed them. Yeah, so that's good. So it is good that he behaved that way and that the police are really, honing in on this. So he says that he had no knowledge of Rob, no knowledge of him being gone. Like, he's completely negating even having talked to Rob that day, which, that was wrong to say. So again, the police are feeling something in their gut, and they get to work on looking at Gacy's background information. So they are doing their job. So to kind of see if he had anything in his past, and of course he would. So the Des Plaines PD actually calls the Chicago PD, and they do find out that Gacy had been on parole in Chicago from the state of Iowa, and they do subsequently find out that he had been a prisoner there and convicted of sodomy of a teenage boy. And the police are stunned, and they're like, huge red flags are just like, all their gut feeling is like, okay, so this is legit. So the detectives the Des Plaines detectives, they go to Gacy's house. They want to interview him. They're putting all these things together, and they're just trying to find Rob. Okay, so they go to his house and they meet Gacy, and Gacy's like, I guess he's out front of his house, like he's trying to leave, like, and he's acting all crazy, in a rush, and telling the police something like, oh, well, my uncle's just died, I need to go, I'll come to the police station, but it's not, like, it won't be today or something. So he's putting them off, because they want him to come down to the police station and give a witness statement, and he says no, he doesn't have time for that. And the detectives literally watch him. He just jumps into his car and he speeds away like crazy driving, which evidently he drove pretty crazy anyway, but immediately sparking even more suspicion in the detectives. And already, I mean, they're on high alert. I mean, this dude has a past. He talked to Rob the day he went missing. Like, it's all not looking good. So, and they just want to find Rob. So based on Gacy's actions, they immediately want a search warrant, because they feel that Rob could be, that what they're hoping is that Rob is alive in Gacy's home. That's what they're hoping. So that's what they're after. They're after their search warrant. So Gacy does eventually show up to the police station, evidently like really early like 3 a.m. in the morning. And he's like covered in mud when he shows up, and the cops are like, what? And then evidently his car was a little bit damaged and dirty, and he's just like, yeah, I got into a little like accident or something. So weird. So this is what's going on. And again, this is all within like a day of Rob going missing. So he's at the police station. The police know they cannot detain him, but they're really wanting to keep him at the police department while they're working on the search warrant. And so they're just thinking that they want to get into his house and find Rob, hopefully alive, hidden somewhere in the home. This is what they're working for. So they're working on the search warrant, and then a detective has Gacy in an interview room, and the detective can tell that Gacy's just a talker. He's full of himself. He loves to chat, about, what a great guy he is. So the detective just plays along with Gacy, and he gets Gacy to talk about his businesses and his involvement with the Democratic Party and just all of it, and literally keeps Gacy talking for hours. I mean, we're talking hours. So he shows up at 3. I think they actually get the search warrant on like that afternoon, like around 4 or 5. They finally have the warrant. And so this is the evening of December 13th. So, and Rob went missing the 11th. So this is literally 48 hours, okay? So they get the search warrant, and the search warrant is very specific to any information connecting specifically with Rob. So that's what's on the search warrant. But it is for Gacy's house. So they search the home, and they do not, unfortunately, they do not find anything that they can see that immediately connects to Rob. They don't find Rob, they don't find anything. However, they do find some stuff that is very concerning to them. So they find a class ring with initials JAS. They find a variety of homosexual pornography. They find shackles in the attic. They find two books in the attic that were hidden, literally hidden under insulation. One was called The Gay Love Letters and Pretty Boys Must Die. And lastly, they find a receipt in the trash from the Nissan Pharmacy photo department. So it's the photo place of the pharmacy. And so it was a photo receipt, but it didn't have a name on it. All it had was like an order number on it. So that's in the trash, mind you, okay? They also find a dildo, a gun. They find drugs, like different drugs like Valium and such. And they find syringes. Just a lot of odd things that Gacy shouldn't have, perhaps. And so then they also find male underwear way too small for Gacy. I mean, he's a big man. So they find, like, teenage size underwear, I guess. And then they also find a blue parka. In addition to all this, they find two driver's licenses belonging to other men, like other boys, that aren't Gacy, they're not Rob. So they're finding, like, just a lot of weird things that Gacy, again, should not have. So, because they don't find anything directly leading to Rob, they have to let Gacy back in his home. They have to let him go. They have to release him to his house. And so they do begin kind of diving deeper into Gacy's past. They do find out he was married in Iowa and had the two children. I mean, they already knew about his time in prison. They also found several people that had worked for Gacy under the PDM that were missing, like boys that were missing persons as well. And all of them were young men. And so they're kind of feeling, I mean, just the more they find out, the more sinister it is appearing to the police. And the more, like, just, I don't know, they're worried. They're worried for Rob. They're very much wanting things to, like, move along, and they feel something's horrible. They have no idea how bad it will be, though. So as of December 14th, after the initial first search warrant, so the police, they do have a great sense of urgency to keep an eye on Gacy. I mean, they know he's up to something. I mean, it's not good. So they do decide to put police on surveillance on him. So they have the Des Plaines police. They confiscate his actual Oldsmobile and other, like, work vehicles for PDM that he had. And so they start to survey him, like follow him. So they have officers like a Mike Albrich, a David Hatchmeister, a Ronald Robinson, and then a Robert Schultz. So these four guys are rotating, and they're doing like 12-hour shifts and rotating, and like two at a time they're tailing him like the whole time. So he is under monitor, and this is supposed to be for 10 days. This is supposed to be a 10-day, I guess the police department agreed, a 10-day surveillance on Gacy starting the 14th. So this would go through the 24th. So the following day, they do actually receive, they're working on lots of things. They're working on all of Gacy's contacts as well. So the following day, investigators receive a phone call from Michael Rossi. And so Michael Rossi is they're interviewing Rossi quite a bit, and David Cram, that both work for Gacy, and kind of every time they're talking to them, they're kind of releasing little tidbits. So Michael Rossi actually does inform the investigators of a boy named Gregory Godzik who disappeared. And Gregory had worked for Gacy. And then there was another PDM employee named Charles Hatula who had evidently was found drowned in an Illinois river like earlier of 1975. So he's telling them these things. So then they're chasing down these leads. On December 15th, the Des Plaines investigators obtained further details of Gacy's battery charge, the one that was dropped in 1971, and they learned that a Jeffrey Rignall had reported that Gacy had, this is the young man from that time period, had reported that Gacy had lured him into his car, and then he had chloroformed him. He had raped and tortured him before dumping him in Lincoln Park. So, yeah, so terrible. In an interview with Gacy's former wife, so they're talking again, they're talking with everybody, with Carol, so they do learn of another disappearance of a worker for Gacy. His name is John Butkovich, and he went missing in 1975. And the same day, the class ring is traced to a young man named John Allen Sick. So remember, it was Jas. So this class ring was found in Gacy's house, and John Allen Sick is a missing person in the area. I mean, so literally, they found this ring of a missing boy. An interview with Sick's mother revealed that several items were taken from John's apartment that were also missing. So it included like a Motorola television. So this was something kind of the police were thinking, okay, we really want to get back into his house. Like, we want to see if he has this television that went missing from John's apartment. So by the 16th, so Gacy knows he's being right off the bat, he knows he's being followed. He immediately talks to again, the detectives are notating, this guy is super nice. I mean, he is super nice. He is very affable. He's nice. He's polite. He's talking to them. I mean, they're following him. So he literally asks them, I mean, he gets to the point where he just tells them where he's going, because he says the police can't even barely keep up with him. Evidently, he was a very fast and furious, crazy driver, evidently. And the police even that are telling him, and we're like, okay, Gacy, we don't want to pull you over for this, but quit driving so crazy. And then Gacy was getting to the point where he would just tell the detectives where he was going, like, I'm going to go here to eat. You're welcome to eat with me. Like, they're literally at this point hanging out. And if he saw them, it's Chicago. It's December. It's cold. Like, he would even have the cops like come in, offer to warm them up, and they could use the bathroom in his house. Like, he is very, very nice to, I mean, he is like not at all concerned. Like, he's charming, he's nice with them. And the police themselves, they're interviewed, later on, and they're like, having to remind themselves why they're following this guy, because they are liking him. They're liking him as a person, and they're having to remind themselves, okay, this dude is being tailed for a reason. So, anywho, so during this time, along with being surveyed, and again, the cops are working this case, they do interview David Cram. So David comes in, just like Michael Rossi, and he's revealing things. So, he said that Gacy evidently had, or David had poor timekeeping, and so Gacy had once given Cram a watch, and he told Cram it was from a dead person. So this was something that Cram relayed to the police. So investigators conducted a formal interview of Michael Rossi on December 17th, and he informed them that Gacy had sold him John Sick's vehicle, explaining that he had bought the car from Sick because he needed money to move to California. A further examination of Gacy's Oldsmobile revealed a small cluster of fibers in the trunk suspected to be human hair. So, and again, this is 1978, so it's not like they could rush out and get DNA on that, but they do find human hair. And that evening, 3 trained search dogs were used to determine whether Piest had been present in any of Gacy's vehicles. And there was one of the dogs that actually laid on the passenger seat of Gacy's Oldsmobile, kind of indicating it was an indicator reaction showing that Piest's body had been present in Gacy's Oldsmobile. So lots of things, again, are coming together on this, and the police are just, this is high alert. So that evening, Gacy invites, so this is like the evening of the 18th. Gacy actually invites Albrecht and Hatchmeister to a restaurant for a meal. He then, I guess this is early morning, they have like some breakfast or something. So he's talking with these guys. He's having a meal with these guys, and he's talking to them about his clown work. And he literally tells the detectives during the conversation, clowns can get away with murder. Like, he says that. So he is just all cockiness and ego. So, and I guess he's thinking he is not going to get caught for anything. So by the end of the date, this is December 18th. So we're on day 4 of being followed. So Gacy is beginning to kind of feel the strains, I guess, of the surveillance. Like, he's not shaving, he's tired. Like, the detectives had kind of noticed at first that Gacy would at least sleep 3 to 4 hours a night. Like, that was like his normal. Like, he only slept 3 to 4 hours. But now he was not sleeping at all. Like, he was not sleeping at all, and he looked crazy. Like, looked tired, haggard. Like, he looked stressed. So they're getting to him. So Gacy does go to his attorney. Like, he has an attorney named Sam Amirati. I think it's Amirante. Sam had just literally left the public defender's office and had now moved into private criminal defense. And so Gacy just found him. I think they had a connection through like the Democratic Party, or through his connection with one of his connections with his civil groups. Like, he knew Sam. So Gacy went to Sam, and he wanted Sam to file a civil suit against the Des Plaines police, demanding that they cease their surveillance. Like, he was done with it. That same day, the police get a huge break. So the Nissan Pharmacy photo receipt found in Gacy's kitchen trash is traced to a 17-year-old girl named Kimberly Byers. She worked with Rob and was friends with Rob, and they worked at the Nissan Pharmacy together. So Byers tells the police that, like, she actually borrowed Rob's parka. He had a blue parka. Remember that blue parka? And she had borrowed it, like, kind of earlier in the evening, the day that they worked together there, the day that Rob went missing, because she was working up front and it was cold. So she borrowed his parka, and she had placed the receipt in the pocket. So she's the one that put the receipt in Rob's parka. Like, he didn't even know he had that receipt. And then she returned the coat to Rob before, like, he left the store that night, before the last night that he was found. So that connected the dots and actually put Rob in Gacy's house. So the police, of course, they're still very vigilant. Now they're like, they have direct evidence Rob was in Gacy's house. They're continuing to tell him, and they're still talking to Michael Rossi and David Cram. So, and again, those guys are continuing to give up bits and bits more of information. And the police are, again, very actively, now, they want a second search warrant. They feel very confident that there's stuff going on under the house. And we'll kind of get into that. But they feel like there was definitely items missed under the house in the first search. So Schultz, one of the officers actually doing the surveillance, the telling on Gacy. So I guess around the 17th or so, he was telling Gacy, and Gacy let him come inside, and Schultz would state when he went into Gacy's bathroom, the heat kicked on. And of course the heat was like, the heat's coming out of it was like a floor vent. And so when the heat kicked on, it sent up a most horrific smell. Like, Schultz said it reminded him of the morgue. Like, it literally smelled like the morgue. Like, it was a horrible scent. And so immediately they felt like there must be something rotting in the crawl space. Also, Rossi and Cram, again, they're telling the police stuff. They tell the police how Gacy had them digging trenches in the crawl space. And the trenches were of varying sizes that were very, very the size of like graves. And that Gacy had them do this over the years, and that Gacy had also had them dump hundreds of pounds of lime under the house. And the whole time, so Gacy's explaining the smell. He's even explaining it like later on in 1992 that the smell, he had a horrible smell under his house because of the clay dirt and then sewage lines. Like that's what he's saying the problem was. But this is what Rossi and Cram are telling the police. So the police, with all this information, of course, the smell and the information from Rossi and Cram, like they know they need to get under the house. So by December 20th, and Gacy is still feeling very frustrated. He's mad that the police are after him. I'm sure he's mad because he's being tailed and he can't do his normal Gacy stuff. But he goes back to Sam Amirani's office, and evidently he tells, like he's drunk, and he tells Sam everything. And Sam comes out. He knows the police are telling Gacy. So Sam, his attorney, comes out and tells the police, do not let Gacy alone. And he's just, he's looking horrified and stricken. The police are like, oh, goodness, like what did Gacy tell him? Because, of course, he's not telling the police what he was told, but he is looking freaked out. And he's telling the police, do not go anywhere. So evidently, Gacy ends up passing out at Sam's office. And then he gets up early in the morning and he leaves. He drives away. And he ends up going, he does a lot of stops, but he ends up going to David Cram's place, and the police are telling him, and then Cram comes out, and he tells the police that Gacy just told him he killed 33 kids, and that he was going to kill himself. So now the police, the cops are just like, oh no, we've got to get this, we've got to get into the house, we've got to get this search warrant. They were afraid Gacy was going to do something crazy to himself, like kill himself. And then they did, Gacy, before he even went to Cram's house, he stopped at like a gas station, and the police literally see him he gives like a kid some marijuana or something. So the police, in an effort to detain Gacy, at least stop him from being able to drive around or being able to kill himself, like they go ahead and detain him on a charge of marijuana, like trying to sell marijuana. So he is taken into custody. Finally, on December 21st, and this is 1978, at 4 p.m., the police have finally their second search warrant in hand. And so they have Gacy on this marijuana charge, so at least he's not going anywhere for the moment. So the police, based on all this horrible information, they immediately go to the crawl space. So I will say this, they did look in the crawl space on the first, because that was a question of mine. They looked at the crawl space during the first search, but they did note there wasn't a smell, but it was very, very cold at the time that they looked, and nothing appeared to be out of sorts with the crawl space. Like, it wasn't like there were holes in the dirt, and it's a very large crawl space, evidently. Like, it goes the whole length of this house, and it's very deep. It's not like you would think of a crawl space. There was room for them to go in there, and even they had to crouch, but it wasn't like crawl. It wasn't like they were on their bellies. There was some room. So just know they did look in the crawl space on the first search, but there was nothing to indicate what they would eventually find out through the interviews with, Rossi. And then there wasn't a smell because it was extremely cold. And so they go to the crawl space. They bring shovels. I mean, it is not within 30 minutes of digging. They start to dig in the crawl space and immediately find a left femur bone with no flesh on it. So they know it's not Rob. I mean, it is fully decayed. And then within minutes of finding this left femur bone, they find another left femur bone. and then a third left femur bone. And obviously, you only have one left femur bone in your body. So they immediately know they have 3 people here. 3, like, fully decayed, no flesh on the bone people under this house. Not Rob, it cannot be Rob. And they literally stop and regroup, and they have no clue about what they're about to get into. And this is where I'm going to leave you in part 1. So, horrible. Part 2, we will uncover, everything that they found under the house and such. We'll cover the trial, conviction of Gacy, and just the horrible aftermath and everything. I mean, there's so much. There's eBay artifacts involved, and then we'll finish on his connection to Arkansas, and we'll explain that. So stay tuned. Thank you for listening. This is horrendous. It's just, you can't even, it's unexplained for sure. So anyway, have a good week, and I love you. Bye. Stay tuned for part 2 and the horrible John Wayne Gacy-ness of it all. So, bye.
So they then decided to go to a spot. Okay, very now they're moving into this. Unexplained.